And we're in Daniel chapter 3. We've been trying to build up our faith, started last week by living dangerously. I challenge you to be dangerous. And with God, it's safe to be dangerous, and it's dangerous to be safe. So it is a dangerous thing for us to be the kind of people in the kingdom that are playing it safe with our lives. We want to be dangerous with our lives when it comes to taking risks for God and what Jesus has called us to. And people who do that become a problem for hell. And I love thinking about this is when we show up in a situation, hell has to back up, which is exactly what Jesus said would happen, that when he said in Matthew chapter 16, I'll build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And we see in there that Jesus is on the offensive and that we're moving and attacking and conquering territory for him as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so when a dangerous person shows up in a situation, whether it's a relationship or a location or whatever it might be, then they're forcing hell to back up and they're conquering territory for the king. But the idea of living dangerously, the fact of the matter is it can create a little heat in your life. And things can get a little bit uncomfortable. And you can start to feel like, where is God, man? I'm trying to live dangerously. The pastor said live dangerously, and I've got myself in a mess here, and it's feeling pretty hot. That can happen. That has happened to me before. When I feel like, boy, I know this is what the Lord wanted me to do, but boy, it sure like feels right now in this moment, like, did I do the right thing here? Or am I sure this is right? And that's part of what it feels like to walk by faith and not by sight. And we started, I shared with you what is faith. The writer of Hebrews says it's like it's evidence of things not seen. We're walking in the realm of the supernatural, and we're believing God is moving in the midst of that, and that's what Scripture teaches us what faith is. And then he goes through all of this stuff in Hebrews 11, it's called the roll call of faith, the heroes of faith. And he talks about how, man, there's all of these different people who've done this. And I challenge you to read some of that and maybe even go back and read some of the stories of those people that are mentioned there in that roll call of faith. Daniel is mentioned. It says that they closed the mouths of lions. And that's a reference to what we learned about a few weeks ago in the book of Daniel. And then it says they quenched the fiery flames or the fury of the flames. And that's a reference to Daniel's compadres, his bros, man, that were with him there in Babylon. And these guys, they show us, their story is found in Daniel chapter 3. And they show us how to deal with heat. It's one of the coolest stories in the Bible. I'm not going to read it because it goes through and it repeats this same line over and over, which is a lot of times the way the writers of the Bible do these things, and I don't want to repeat that over and over and over. I want to save time. I'm practicing for 3 services on Easter, and so I gotta trim this thing down, man, because there's not that much time when we get it. And everybody said, "Yeah, I figured that was to say. I figured you would." So anyway, what the situation we have is Israel is in Babylonian captivity. So what has happened? Well, they were promised the land, and they were given their land, and they were given a law in that land once they received the land. And God told them that if you're faithful to me and you follow me, I'll take care of you and I'll provide for you. But if you rebel against me, then I will punish you for that. And there will be discipline executed upon you as a nation in order to call you back to a place of repentance. And so God raised up prophets to teach them that and challenging them when they were getting away. And ultimately they got away, and a prophet prophesied that they would be carried away into captivity. And indeed they were, by this king by the name of King Nebuchadnezzar. And so King Nebuchadnezzar, he takes a lot of the Israelites back to Babylon with him to kind of take care of the affairs of his kingdom. And he takes the choice people and some of the most talented ones, and certainly some of them were left behind. There's always a remnant that remains in the land, and in this case, Daniel is caught up to go into Babylonian captivity and live in a foreign land. And he is recognized as even some of the, he and his buddies rise to the top of those that were exiled. And so he's recognized already, but he has not, he and his bros, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, haven't risen as high as they're about to rise. And so what happens is the king has this dream. And this is taught in chapter 2. And the king, he is disturbed by the dream, man. He doesn't know what this dream means. And he knows the dream wasn't just caused because he ate a bad chili relleno last night, right? This dream means something because he remembers it in detail. And it's bothering him. And he feels like for some reason, and unbeknownst to him, he doesn't even know why, but he wants to know what this dream means. And so he summons all of his magicians and wise men and astrologers. They had all of these people that would kind of interpret dreams. And Daniel, no doubt, was caught up in this a little bit, or he was one of the wise consultants in the kingdom. And so the king issues this decree, and he says, somebody is going to tell me what this dream means, or you're all going to die. And so they're like, well, tell us the dream. He said, no, I'm not telling you the dream. You tell me what I dreamed, and then tell me what it means. That way I know that you know what you're talking about, and you're just not making some stuff up. And so they're like, wait a minute. Nobody's ever asked that of a wise man or a magician. That's impossible. You don't know what you're asking. He said, this is how it's going to be. You're all going to die. I'm going to cut you in pieces if you don't find somebody that can do it. And so evidently he had felt manipulated in some way or fashion, and he knew this dream was important. So they're all freaking out, man, and they don't know what to do. And eventually the decree is about to be executed, and this guy is sent out to do it. And Daniel interacts with this guy, and Daniel's like, what is going on here, man? And he's like, well, man, the king said everybody has to die because nobody can tell him what he dreamed and what the dream means. And he won't tell anybody what he dreamed. And so my job is to kill all these people. He's like, I need a little time. Let me go talk to the king. So he goes and talks to the king, and he tells the king, King, I need a little more time. I think I can do this. He said, I don't have the power to do it, but my God knows everything. He knows all the mysteries. He said, I just need some time. So the king grants him some time, and so he immediately goes back to his house, and he gets with his bros, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he's like, look, bros, we got to have the Lord move in this situation, or a lot of people are going to die. And so they go to praying all night long. Man, they're in a spirit of prayer, and they're pleading and interceding and asking the Lord to show them what is the thing that the king dreamed and what does it mean. And all of a sudden, God supernaturally, he reveals it to Daniel. And Daniel's like, I got it, man. The Lord gave it to me. Now, this would have been a really cool moment for Daniel. He goes back to the king and he says, King, the God I serve has revealed the mystery of your dream to me. And he begins to talk to the king, and he tells him, you've dreamed about this giant statue. It's made out of these different materials, and the head of the statue is gold, and that head means that it's a representative of your kingdom. And so he kind of tells him and makes an interpretation of the dream. And so the king is like, Daniel, man, he just went from being right here to whoop. He's moved and elevated to second in command in the kingdom. And so he assumes this high level of leadership. Now, he's not mentioned in our story in Daniel chapter 3, but I tell that part of the story because his three brothers, or not brothers really, but bros, if you will, his bros, they go up with him, man, and they're in prayer with him, and so they get elevated in their position of leadership as well. And so we don't know where Daniel's at in this story. He's not mentioned. The Bible's sort of silent on it. He could have been doing some of the king's business. Could have been back in the palace. We don't know exactly why he's not mentioned in this story, but he's not actually in this story. But these three guys are in the story. And so this king, after he has this dream and after Daniel tells him the interpretation of it, he builds the image, okay? Now, the difference in his image that he builds and the one in the dream is he wraps all of it in gold. And this image is described in the Bible as being in the form of a man or a human, and it's 90 feet tall by 9 feet wide. It was probably on some sort of a base or something, and so he takes all this time to construct this image, and he issues a decree that everybody is to worship this thing. And so he kind of misses the whole idea of or Daniel's God helped him to be able to interpret the dream, and he's polytheistic. He's wrapped up in worshiping all kinds of gods, so he just believes that Daniel's God is one of them. And so he builds this thing, and he requires everybody to worship it when the music plays. All right, and so they get this thing built, and he says anybody who doesn't worship this image will go into the furnace that probably they used to make the bricks to construct the image. It's kind of weird if you think about they're worshiping something they made, but that's kind of what people do. And so they get the image finished, and he gets all of his leadership, man, all of the people that were in charge of leadership, and they're basically going to have a ribbon cutting, and they're going to dedicate this thing, and the band is going to play, and when the band plays, man, we're going to have this really cool moment where everybody's going to bow down, and they're going to worship this amazing image that King Nebuchadnezzar has constructed with all of his power and authority that he had. And so they play the music, man, and everybody bows down to worship, but there are some guys who notice that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they don't do it, man. And they already didn't like those guys because they were foreigners in their land, and they had already risen to a level of leadership and surpassed many of them. And these astrologers, it says, noticed them not doing it. And so they go to the king and they say, "Oh, king, live forever. Somebody is not listening to what you've decreed, and they are not worshiping this image like you said they must." And they started to play to his ego, and they said, the Hebrews aren't doing it, man. These Jews aren't doing it. And you need to execute some justice in this matter because they're not giving any attention to anything you've said, which is not true. They paid attention to a lot of the things that the king said. They just weren't paying attention to this thing because it was direct violation of what they knew to be obedience to God and walking out what God had called them to have no other images before him. Don't worship anything but me. And so anyway, this infuriates the king. And so the king sends for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he knows that these guys are a part of his leadership team. And so he has got a little bit of a problem here because he's benefited from their leadership, but they're also usurping his authority by not listening to what he said for them to do. And so he kind of creates a scenario. He's like, "Man, is it true, bros, that you didn't worship? When the music played, I got this band together, I built this image, and what is going on here?" He said, "We're going to play the music one more time and give you guys a second chance." He's like, "We don't need a second chance." So it doesn't matter if the music plays. And it doesn't matter if you're going to throw us into the fiery furnace. We will not bow down. And even if you throw us in the furnace, we will not bow down because our God is able to rescue us. And even if he doesn't, we would rather burn than bow down. You don't need to play the music, king. This is where we're at, man. This is what our God has called us to. And we have no other choice but to walk in obedience to him. And so this enrages the king even further. And so he says to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than it is, which is basically a way to say, get that thing as hot as you can get it. Like 7 was a number that meant kind of perfection and completion. And so like, get that thing as hot as you can get it. And then bind those guys up. He tells his strongest soldiers, tie those guys up and toss them in there clothed and everything, which was different than the way they would normally do it. They would usually kind of take some of their clothes off and then throw them in there to speed up the death of the whole process. And so they bind them up, man. They've got that thing roaring, and there's evidently the way this thing is constructed, there's a top level and a lower level where they would put things in, and the fire and the furnace, actually the heat from the coals and how everything kind of blew up through the chimney and all that stuff. And so they some way how they could put things in from above and see below. And so they get ready and they take them, they bind them up, and some of these strong guys take them up there to put them in the fire, and somehow something happens that it's so hot that even the soldiers that were responsible for putting them in, I don't know if the fire blew out of the thing or what, but it killed these guys. And these three Hebrew guys, man, they fall into the flames. Go boom, boom, all this stuff. And the king jumps up, man. He's like, didn't we put 3 in there? She said, yes, king, we put 3 in. He said, I see 4, and one of them looks like a son of one of the gods. It's like, what is going on? And they're walking around in there unharmed. And so this miracle is taking place. And so the king just calls out, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, come out of there. And they come out of the fire, man. And it says that all of the leadership, man, that was around there observing this miracle, observing what happened. It says they inspected them. Their clothes wasn't burned. Their hair wasn't singed. Their skin wasn't harmed. And they didn't even smell like smoke, man. Now you go out and grill something, you're going to smell like smoke, and these bros were in it. Didn't even smell like smoke. So the king is like, man, no other God can save like these guys' God. And so he issues another decree because he knows he's just witnessed a miracle. And he says that if anybody says anything against the Hebrew God and any other nation or our nation, he said, let them be cut into pieces and their homes destroyed to rubble. And then he promotes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's one of the coolest miracles in all of the Bible. If you grew up in church, you've heard it. And some people go, well, come on, man, that's not possible. Don't you think that's kind of figurative? I mean, is that really what you believe, Jimmy? That's really what I believe. But I also believe a dead guy was dead 3 days and rose from the dead. I believe in the supernatural. I believe in the miracles. And I believe this is a miracle. You say, well, that's why some people think we're foolish. Listen, it doesn't mean it. If you're an atheist and you believe completely in science, at some point, when you look at the creation of the world and you say, well, I believe in a Big Bang, that's a miracle. You have to, at some point, believe in the supernatural to make an explanation for things when you look at it and boil it right down. The difference between your miracle and my miracle is I have a historic record of the miracles that God himself has created and left behind so that I'm not making a blind leap in the dark like you are, which I think is foolish. So I'm not the foolish one. The person who is denying the Hebrew God of the Bible is the one who's making a blind. That's a different sermon, okay? And I got to finish. Anyway, that encourages me when I think about that. I could go on for that, but I won't. We'll learn from, like, what do these guys teach us, okay? There's a few lessons. I'm gonna throw them at you rapidly here, and hopefully they encourage you. They encourage me. They encourage us to be dangerous for the Lord. Don't play it safe. There are so many people who play it safe, and we wonder, and we even look at our country and we go, man, golly, I hear people talk about how great the country used to be, and man, it just seems like morally, what happened? There are too many believers that are playing it safe. That's what happened. The church is too safe. When the church gets dangerous, man, revivals start to break out. When young people get dangerous, leaders start. Man, I'm telling you, there's no way I'm going to finish on time. I get so frustrated. I look at people running for office, and I'm like, is this the best we have? Is this it, man? And the fact of the matter is because we don't have enough people being dangerous for the Lord. I mean, who knows, man? We may have a United States senator sitting right here in this building right now if you would just get dangerous and believe the Lord could use you. The Lord can use us to do all kinds of, these guys were in this incredible place of leadership, and they were raised up to a place and position of power, and they were raised up consistently by trusting God, by denying the kind of food they would eat. That's how it started. And then here they're denying the God that they were told to worship. They wouldn't do it because it put them in a place of rebellion. So they're constantly living dangerously, and we learn some things about them. And if we can kind of repeat that pattern, even when the heat gets turned up in our lives and we've taken a risk for the Lord and it feels like, man, I might burn in this situation, we can see these guys, we see them on the backside, and we know that what happened for them, but we must be reminded they didn't know if they were going to be rescued. We have to see this as it was playing out and go, how were these guys walking through this? They were walking through it having made up their mind before the events ever happened that they were living a dangerous lifestyle and no one was going to infringe upon their relationship between the creator of the universe and what he had called them to in purpose. And so what do we learn? Dangerous people fear God more than man, okay? That's what we learn from this story. He says, now when you hear, this is what he said to them. The king said to them when he calls them in the second time, and this is the actual verse, I believe it's verse 15. It says, now when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and all kinds of music, how come we don't have a zither, Sean? You don't even know what it is. We're going on. He probably does know what it is. It says, pipes and all kinds of musics. If you're ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. And listen to what he says. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? And so this was a test of their confidence in God. It was a test of their faith. And I think that we can expect that. If you're going to live dangerously and you're going to take a risk and you're going to believe that God has called you to something and you take a step of faith, you can expect that you are going to be tested in that faith. It started for me all the way back when I got serious with my commitment to the Lord and I quit living a safe lifestyle as a Christian. And I decided I was going to be dangerous around the age of 22. And I was like, man, I'm done with this. Like if I believe this, I'm selling out to it. I want to live this way. And I stepped over the line, man. And the Lord started moving it. It meant a lot of changes for me in my life. It meant that some things that were a little scary I was going to be experiencing it. And one of them I remember, man, is as I was taking this risk and I would see the Lord show up, I met Abby, I think it was, I don't know, sophomore year. Was I a sophomore or junior? I was a sophomore, yeah. And so I met her, and I would just thought she was absolutely beautiful and just fell in love, man. And then the Lord set up this situation after we had been dating for a few months where I got accepted, one of 35 students across the country, to go to Focus on the Family and be in this leadership institute. And I knew before I applied, I was listening to James Dobson talk on the radio, and I knew like when he was talking, I had the Spirit of the Lord come over me and I wept in my truck. And I knew right then I was going to be at that place. I knew all I needed to do was apply, that God was going to make a way. And I applied and they accepted me. And so now I'm in. She already was going to a different college than I was. Now I'm going to go to Colorado Springs and leave her back in Oklahoma, and somebody's going to steal her. I was terrified. Even after I got there and I was there, I remember having a spiritual attack that came over me, man. I was so overwhelmed in a moment and got so homesick. Partly because, man, I lived right across from Pikes Peak. And if you're a flatlander from Oklahoma, that thing will make you claustrophobic. Just right there, man. It's like, what is on the other side of that? And I drove one day, and all that's on the other side of it is a whole bunch more mountains. But anyway, I just got overwhelmed in this moment. It was a couple of weeks in, maybe my second week there, and I got on the interstate, man, and I could just feel so oppressed, and I felt like, man, I'm going to go pack up all my stuff. I'm going home. And I just got on the interstate and drove. I didn't pack everything up. I just got on the interstate and was driving. And the Lord just told me, I got you. And so I tell that story, and he did. I came back home, and she's now my wife today, right? He did, he provided, but I was terrified in that moment. I was terrified to leave everything familiar behind. I was terrified even to put her at risk, but God had called me to this, and it was one of the most impactful things that I experienced in my time in college. It just opened my mind to the world and some of the things that I was exposed to during that semester that I attended there, and it was only a semester-long program, but the thing I want you to hear is is we can expect that right there in that moment, I was living dangerously and all of my confidence and my faith in God was tested. It was tested right there. Did I trust God to take care of all of this? Or did I need to like go back home and take care of it myself? And that was the big test here, because these guys, they're being told, who can save you? Like, I'm about to toss you in this furnace. If you don't bow down and worship this image, who can save you? And these guys made life decisions fearing God more than man. And I'm not sure that we really know how to do that because we're afraid, because it's not safe for us to do that. See, the safe approach would be, well, God has grace and he will forgive me. And he knows that if I stay in this leadership position, I may be able to impact a lot of things for the kingdom. So he knows my heart. He knows I really am not going to worship this thing. I'm just going to bow down and let it pass by, and I will continue to worship him as I always do. And we would justify in our minds. That would be a safe approach if we approached it that way. But these guys didn't do it. They cared more about God. They feared God more than man, and therefore that's what made them dangerous. And so that's what we have to do, is when we step out in a dangerous experience in our lives and we take a risk for the Lord, the heat is going to get turned up, and you're going to be a little unsure, and the confidence in your faith is going to be tested, but it's for a reason. You're going to be refined in that fire. And so you have to fear God more than you do man. And man can execute some things against you. And man can be fearful for you. And the scariest man or woman in your life is you. That's the scariest voice. You're afraid of what you will lose. And so the person I fear the most, I have to be the most concerned about being afraid of, is myself. What I'm afraid that I will put myself in a position of losing something, and I have to fear God more than I do what the consequences for me are, or anyone outside for that matter as well. So dangerous people fear God more than man. Dangerous people are never left alone because they fear God more than they do man. They're never left alone. It says the king Nebuchadnezzar, it says in verse 24, leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that were tied up and threw into the fire? And they replied, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. We can expect to feel the heat, but not be left alone in the fire. And what I love about this is that they believed God could save them, but wasn't sure he would save them. They weren't sure. They just believed he could. And so they were willing to believe even if it cost them their lives. And so they laid down their lives as a sacrifice, and Jesus joined them there. And that's where he will join you too. And what is so cool about the story is that they were thrown in there, fully clothed and bound, and the only thing that burned up was the things that people put on them to tie them down. So they found freedom in the midst of the fire. And Jesus was there in their midst. And he's the one that made sure that the ropes burned up and they were set free and unharmed as they walked by faith and not by sight. And so we see that freedom comes because we're never left alone when we're fearing God more than we are man, even including ourselves. I'm fearing God more than I am my own self. I'm making decisions based upon what God thinks, not what I think. I've laid down my life on the altar of sacrifice. I'm beginning to walk in freedom. And because of that, dangerous people change the world. They just changed the world. He says, then Nebuchadnezzar after this said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. Guess what happened because of the faithfulness of these 3 guys? All of the Jews that were in captivity benefited from their faith because they conquered territory for the king. And that's what living dangerously means, is I'm conquering territory for the king. Now, it was a decree issued. The king didn't become a believer, like he believed that God existed, but he didn't become a convert to Judaism at that point. He just issued a decree and said, don't anybody talk bad about this God, because this God just defeated me, and he's one that we're going to respect, which meant that all of those people who were exiled and taken away into captivity, they could now freely worship God, even in a land where they were held captive as physical slaves to Nebuchadnezzar. And that happened because there were dangerous people who were fearing God more than man, and they were not left alone. So God joined them there, and in the midst of that miracle, a decree was issued, and God will use us like that when we are willing to live dangerously. Why will God do that? Because as it says there in the end of verse 29, for no other God can save in this way. No other God can save like our God. There are all kinds of gods that exist, and all of them are man-made, save the one that we're looking at and talking about. I say, why aren't you saying he's man-made? Because I'm reading about him and throughout history, and I'm seeing all this miraculous stuff, and I'm trusting in that he is the one true God. And if he is, he says all of them are man-made, okay? And so as I look at him, and he's calling me to this, no one can save like Jesus. No one can. And as we think about that, we know that, and we go, wow, yeah, we learn about the doctrine of heaven, man. Like when we are saved from our sin, we can go to heaven, and the Lord forgives us, man. We're saved from his wrath and spared. He gives us grace and mercy, and this other destination eternally for people is the doctrine of hell. We learn about that. I want that one, right? Not a hard one. I don't want to spend an eternity separated from God. And so we trust God and we go, man, Lord, save my soul. And I trust you to save my soul. But God is asking, do you trust him to save your life that you're living right now? Because, see, salvation is about both then and there and here and now. And the truly saved are willing to trust the Lord with their lives right now. And that is when we start to experience the abundant life that Jesus talked about, that we're walking, we're listening to his voice, and he's moving in our lives. But as we live in this dangerous place, man, we see the hand of God moving in more incredible ways. And the Lord fuels us, man, and he uses us to change the world around us. And so my question for you is, do you believe that nobody can save your life like Jesus? If you do, then Jesus should be deciding if you go to college and where. Jesus should be deciding what kind of work you do and who you do it for, because he is Lord. So everything, Jesus should be deciding how you parent your kids, not your neighbors, and not your fear of whether or not they will think you're weird parents because you parent differently. Maybe if we all parented differently and we were dangerous, then a decree would be issued and some of our friends would come our way instead of us going their way. You see, a dangerous person shows up and hell has to back up. If hell is welcome, then we're living a safe lifestyle. And so we're afraid sometimes of the decisions that we make because we're afraid of how it might be interpreted by other people. Even as parents, sometimes we can be influenced about the decisions that we make because we're thinking, well, what are her friends going to think, or what are their parents going to think? I don't care. And you shouldn't either, because no other God can save like our God, and our kids need to see us walking out in faith, our obedience to Christ, even in our parenting. And if we play it safe with them, they will leave the church, just like Pat taught us a few weeks ago. The statistics show it. Why are they leaving the church? Because too many parents are safe and they don't know what it looks like to live a dangerous lifestyle. And Christianity is a miserable place to be if you never see the Lord showing up, rescuing you out of the midst of the fiery flames. But when he shows up, your kids will see it and they will want some of that because you've started to drink deep from the well that only Jesus can serve, the water that satisfies, and nothing else matters. The materialism and the all of the money that we could have and the success that we could experience as we climb the corporate ladder, it's meaningless. It's all meaningless and it's rubbish because it won't pass through the fire. But when we get on fire for Jesus, and the fire is actually burning in us, then nothing on the outside can actually burn us because we have been set free and the ropes have been, that have bound us have been burned off and we're walking in this place of freedom. So now the corporate ladder becomes a tool. Now the material stuff that we possess becomes a tool. It becomes resources in the midst of the kingdom for me to walk out and bring transformation everywhere that I go so that when I step into a location, whether my family is called by God to move somewhere, or my family is called by God to invite another family over for dinner, whatever it is, hell is constantly on the retreat because it is threatened by my mere presence because my heart burns with the fire of the Lord. That's what it means to follow the Lord, to be dangerous. And so dangerous people understand the quickest way up is usually down. That's what happens in this story. They go down and the Lord elevates them. The king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. What often appears to be a demotion turns out to be a promotion in the kingdom. It's because we're walking by faith and the Lord is always with us. So what if they would have died? Promotion. Like sometimes I just go through, I go walk through life and say, Lord, I wouldn't mind if I died today. I don't feel very good. You say, "Boy, you really think that sometimes?" Yes, I do. Like sometimes I get tired of the struggle. Like sometimes I get tired of the war. Sometimes I just want to go home and see the Lord, man. Like I wasn't made for this world. This world is broken. And Jesus ultimately will fix it and repair it. And I know that for me to die as Christ is gain. Like for me to live as Christ, for me to die is gain. I welcome what the Apostle Paul said. And so like I don't want to die. Lord, I don't want to die today. Like I'm not afraid of it though. Like there's parts of me that just welcomes it, man. Like I just welcome it. And that's the freedom when the ropes are burned off, man, is that we understand that nothing can touch us. And so any kind of demotion, even in the demotion of death, it has no victory or sting. It has been removed by the cross and we are promoted. And so even in life when it feels like everything's fallen apart, if we will continue to trust the Lord and have a dangerous lifestyle, the Lord will promote us in things that are scary and they feel like the heat is being turned up. And that brings us to the big idea of today's talk. Develop a dangerous attitude. This is what these guys said. And this is really cool. You can miss this if you read through it too quickly. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, this is verse 17. The God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But look at verse 18. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Even if he doesn't rescue me, I still will trust him. Though he slay me, Job says, I still will trust him. Now, we can be dangerous in so many different ways, some of which I've already mentioned. But the idea here is really what Jesus, and when we develop a dangerous attitude, is what Jesus talked about in Matthew 16:25. If you try to save your life, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life for me, you'll find it. And so my challenge for all of us today is I want to encourage you, man. I want to build you up in your faith, your most holy faith. And the only way that I can tell you that this works is it doesn't work by playing it safe. It just doesn't. That's why churches, man, that start getting it, that's why they grow, is because the people are just dangerous, man. They're out there and they're reaching people, and the thing gets movement, and people just start experiencing the fire of the Lord showing up in their lives, protecting them, and it's an exciting thing to be a part of. And so I want you to go out this week, man, and have a dangerous attitude. Have a dangerous attitude at school. Have a dangerous attitude at work. Have a dangerous attitude in your neighborhood or with your neighbors. Wherever the Lord takes you, man, have a dangerous attitude. Lose your life, and you'll find it. Don't try to protect your life. Don't try to save it. Lose it, and you'll find it, because Jesus is always showing up in the midst of that dangerous place. And so we're heading toward Easter, you know. It's an easy time for you to be dangerous and invite people. It's an easy time. People are thinking about spiritual things. They'll be thinking about going to church. More people will go to church in the next couple of weeks than any other Sunday of the entire year, which means you know, people don't know where they're going to go in a couple of weeks. And I think this is a great place for them to be exposed to the truth of the word. And so be dangerous and invite some people. Be dangerous. If somebody, like, you find out, you go, how can you be dangerous this week? I mean, you're at school, and one of your classmates, one of your friends says, my parents, they're struggling. They've been talking about separating, maybe a divorce. A safe person says, I'm going to pray for you. A dangerous person says, let's pray for your mom and dad right now. And you put your hands on them and you pray over their parents. You see, a dangerous person is saying, I will remember you in my prayer. Or a safe person says, I will remember you in my prayers. A dangerous person says, let's call upon the Lord right now. And he said, I don't know, man, I can't pray out loud. You're safe. That's why you can't pray out loud. If you can talk, you can pray. Because all prayer is talking to God. And the devil's got us thinking, man, that, well, I'm going to mess up. How do you mess a conversation up? You just talk to the Lord. And you say, Lord, help us. And sometimes you don't even have to know what to say. The Lord will just give you the words to say, or you might even just weep over your friend. And it is enough. It is enough. We can all say, Lord, please help my brother. I love him, and I want to see you move in this situation. Amen. Don't overcomplicate it. It doesn't take a lot of intelligence to be dangerous. As a matter of fact, all that intelligence is what's causing you to play it safe. Be a fool for Christ, and you'll find freedom. Heavenly Father, we love you. We thank you. We pray that you would help us to be dangerous, to have a dangerous attitude this week. Help me to be dangerous, Lord. It's easy for me to play it safe, just like it is for all of my brothers and sisters. I want to be dangerous this week. I know that I find freedom in those moments. And I pray for this entire body of believers, Lord, that we would go out and we would have a dangerous attitude this week, and we would celebrate how you're showing up, and we would set the world on fire for you, because that's what it needs, Lord. We pray that as we conclude this service, that you would have your way and move on hearts as only you can. With every head bowed and every eye closed, there are people here to pray with you this morning. Maybe you'd like to come down and just nail a commitment down to the Lord, lay your life down in some way. There are people that'll pray with you, or maybe you just want to come and kneel and pray at the stage yourself, but just want you to know that's available for you as we close out in this last worship song.